Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Digital League of Assessment Professionals, also known as DLAP, a collective of assessors especially created to professionalize assessment within the digital space. This morning we are hosted by P4P. Passion for Performance continues to be the leading e-assessment platform in South Africa. And in our experience, we've been exploring and searching for ways to create a space for assessment within the digital world, and hence the birth of DLAP. My name is Gabriel and I'll be your host this morning. I'm a trainer in the pro audio space, and I also support a product called Soundcraft. Thank you for joining us on this very cold morning. Our topic this morning is recognizing learning now and in the future. And we're talking to Joe Samuels. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Everyone who's been in this industry will know Joe, obviously, from his work he's done at SACWA, 22 years, amazing. And obviously his involvement with the implementation of the NQF. Joe, I'm just going to ask you just to tell us a little bit of your work career up till now and what you're busy with at the moment. And then obviously we're going to dive into some questions.
Okay, Gabriel, I think you alluded to the fact that I worked at SACWA for 22 years.
Yep.
I started out at SACWA as the director for standards setting, or at that stage it was called framework implementation, which had two dimensions to it. The one dimension dealt with the accreditation of providers, and the other dimension dealt with the development of standards and qualifications. I worked as a director for about 7 years, and then I became the deputy executive officer for another 7 years, and then 8 years as the CEO. Sure. But before that, I was also a teacher. I worked in a laboratory, in the Western Cape, and I also lectured at University of the Western Cape in physiology. Sure. For some time, and then I moved into adult education and spent about 10 years there. So, I mean, that in very short is what I've done. Now, what I'm doing at the moment, I'm meant to be on early retirement, so I kind of do the stuff that I like doing. I like talking about recognition, and that is why I'm here this morning to talk to you about that. Gabriel, if you can just allow me a few minutes to say that, we are speaking about the issue of recognition of learning this morning, but we have been brought into the situation by this crisis that we have with the pandemic and so on. I want to just say, one thing, that there are thousands of people in South Africa that's infected and affected by this pandemic, by this COVID-19, and there are thousands upon thousands of people that have died across the world and in South Africa. And I think it is indeed the right thing to do is to just for a moment, keep all of those people that are infected and affected in mind, as we proceed.
Absolutely. And obviously we're thinking about their families in this very difficult time.
Okay, thank you for the questions.
We're diving into questions, and first question is, what current policies are in place to recognize learning?
Look, I think the main thing when we're talking about recognizing of learning is that learning and the kind of mechanisms in place has largely been dominated by people in what I would call in kind of big buildings. So in other words, if you think about formal learning, that in essence, in the formal learning, there are, we've got various kinds of assessments in which people's, learning, is being recognized. And as I said, the dominant model has been that, generally it is kind of face-to-face learning. And most of the models of recognition, is based on, that kind of interaction. And that kind of interaction is being challenged in a major way. With the pandemic, that is forcing us, not to be face to face, but that we need to be apart, as it were. So all the policies and all of those kinds of instruments that we have largely focuses on, this idea that there will be, a teacher in front of you, and that learners will learn, and the teachers will teach you. And, that is also how assessments, has been created and has been set up. Now, I've worked in SAQA for 22 years, as we've said at the beginning. And even if one looks at the National Qualifications Framework, that the National Qualifications Framework is an instrument of recognition. And, although when we started the National Qualifications Framework in about 22, 23 years ago, there was quite a lot of revolutionary ideas that was embedded, in the kind of idea of learning, because we were saying, in fact, the policy is there. It says that it doesn't matter where you learn, it doesn't matter how you learn, that your learning will be recognized. And I must say, reflecting back, as it were, that although we started out with that idea of learning, and that this wonderful instrument, will allow people to learn in whatever way they want to learn, or that they have learned, that we will find mechanisms of recognizing that learning. I must say that dream is a dream that we are still trying to put in place. Because although the policy environment creates the possibilities for learning other than formal learning, we are struggling, to put in the mechanisms to recognize learning, not only in the formal setting, but in the non-formal setting and in the formal setting. And as I said, even in the formal setting, there's a dominance, of this face-to-face kind of interaction, as it were. So I think that what the pandemic has done in a major way is to challenge, that paradigm that we are used to. And so therefore I'm excited to be interviewed, online today, because I think what the pandemic has done, it has really, really challenged us in major kind of ways to think differently about it. And I do think now is the time for organizations that have been in the online space, in the distance learning space, in the blended learning space, on the online space, that it challenges the dominant regulatory way of thinking and the dominant ways of doing it.
Yeah, there's definitely a shift. I've even seen it in the training space, is where, we used to have the luxury of just rolling out content over a very long period. That everyone's expecting us to condense that now, and it's obviously also going to have an effect on how we eventually assess that, right? So policies are going to have to some degree.
Can I also just make that other point there, I think that you're making, right, which I think is also important. Because, this paradigm of recognizing learning, or the dominant way of recognizing learning, is so pervasive that what people are trying to do, even when they are going online, is that they take the stuff that they just do in the way in which they do it in the classroom, and they try to reproduce that online. Now, I mean, people will tell you that's involved with online learning and distance learning. It simply doesn't work in that way. So therefore, I mean, if you think about it, that teachers are now being forced, that is used to teaching people one-on-one, or teaching people in a classroom setting. Now they need to go online, and they are challenged in major kind of ways about in what way do we really teach that is meaningful. So, so I'm saying that paradigm of just taking what it is that you do in the classroom and trying to reproduce that online, I mean, that is clearly not something that is working. So in fact, we need to think about new ways in which the learning, the teaching and learning takes place, but we must also think about new ways in which the assessment of that learning takes place.
Absolutely. Oh, I love this topic. I can talk about this forever. I'm thinking, I don't know, our time is going to allow us, but yeah. What are some of the latest policy developments on a regional, continental, and global level that will assist to recognize learning?
Yeah, as I said, one of the key things that we have to do is that a lot of the policies that certainly that I've been involved in, that we've been talking about, we recognized, in last year, for example, that technology is such a major driving force going forward. So a lot of the policy thinking that was done, both at the national level, at the regional level, as well as at the continental and global level, took into consideration the technological changes and so on. But I think that, no one of us really considered that this black swan event will push us in the way, that it is pushing us and is pushing the issues of technology forward in major ways and so on. So let me just then talk a little bit about some of those policy instruments that I think, as I'm sitting here, we would have to rethink, because I think it's outdated, quite frankly. Let me give you an example. In South Africa, there was an evaluation of the National Qualifications Framework that happened in 2018 and 2019. So the ideas that has been put forward in those documents is also based, on the dominant kind of ideas of recognizing learning. So I think that, some of those documents would have to be rethought in the light of what we're experiencing now. A second example at the national level is the white paper on post-school education and training. Again, I think that document was developed in 2014, and it needs to be rethought, in a kind of major way, taking into consideration both the technological advances as well as the fact that we need to have physical distancing taking place. So those are two examples at the national level. At the regional level, the SADC developed a regional qualifications framework, which is called the SADC qualifications framework. Now again, again, the way that we thought about it then, also, I think, there needs to be a rethink in terms of that. And at the African level, the continental level, there's initiatives at the moment happening of establishing a continental qualifications framework for the continent. Now, luckily, what they are busy with at the moment at the continental level is to do a mapping exercise. Now, that mapping exercise, given the fact that it is right, in the middle of the pandemic and so on, that already people are thinking about, so what are some of the technological things that one can build into this particular process. So, so it is fortuitous in a sense that now what is needed, is to look at it in this way. But let me just become a little bit more technical in what I'm saying. Some of the traditional things that is contained in some of the policy documents that I've spoken about is obviously, and Shirley spoke about this last week, is to say that people must be able to recognize prior learning. So that is one dimension. But the other dimensions also is what these policy documents have tried to incorporate and has been trying to push, the traditional institutions to open up the possibilities for recognizing other kinds of learning. Is, for example, in the EDIS document, they speak about that what institutions must do, they must move to a situation where they recognize partial learning. So in other words, if I do a little bit of something here and there and so on, that there must be mechanisms put in place to recognize, parts of learning, as it were. Then, of course, we know that over the last number of years, there's been huge increases in terms of massive online courses, or as I think they call it, books and so on. Now, in South Africa, for example, universities have got a clause, in the act that says that they can only recognize 50% of the learning that people have done elsewhere.
Sure.
Now, if you think a little bit about that, you are really, really thinking about, a university as an institution that operated in the 15th century and not in the 21st century. So in other words, some of those blockages that is there needs to change, so that you're opening up the space for people to be able to go online, learn, even if they learn 90% or 80%, of the content there, that they can come back and you can assess them, at an institutional level, and then, give people, recognition for that through a certificate or whatever the case might be. Let me go further that a number of people have gotten together and they were thinking about different models, of delivery of learning. So, for example, the Qatar Foundation, has sponsored a study that was done, and they developed 5 models that they are thinking going forward. Higher education, for example, could get involved. For example, the first model is a model called online university, where people just go online and they learn everything there and so on. A second model is what is called a cluster model, where you have different kinds of institutions coming together and then offering, students, the kind of learning that is necessary. Of course, one of the things that we've been grappling with in South Africa for a long time, Gabriel, is this idea of how do you integrate education and training. I don't think that, we've tried different things here and we were not successful in terms of doing that. But also, you would also appreciate the fact that in some cases, it's easy for people to just learn knowledge and stuff like that. But when it comes to the application thereof, you would like to see that happening. And so, again, what we would have to do is to think about that. So one of the models that people are thinking about is called the experiential model of delivering higher education, which then get people to try to problem solve things. They can solve problems, in particular kind of settings and so on. And if one talks about assessment in those kinds of environments, then you can view that. It can be on a camera, it can be real time, and a whole range of other things. The fourth model is a thing called the Liberal Arts College, which is small places and so on, and which in the United States there are quite a number of these kind of institutions and so on. Yeah. But of course, the point there also is that one of the biggest problems has been with education and delivering education in a face-to-face way is the cost has become so big.
Yeah.
I think that one of the key things that can happen, and what again the technology allows us to do, is to bring the prices down of things, so that we don't charge people, all this huge sums of money. In the US, for example, when people go to college, they are saddled with such big debts. It's just unbelievable. Yeah. Similarly, in South Africa, the whole movement around the fees must fall has got to do with this thing where, that education has become so expensive, in these institutions. And then the fifth model that people are talking about and debating across the world now is what is called a partnership model, where different partners come together and they are delivering particular kinds of things and so on. So what I'm saying is that, these are just 5 models that some people are thinking about that, that could be put in place beyond COVID, as it were. But at the same time, that the number of these things are being tested and tried, as we are talking, and we're trying to grapple with what it is that we need to do.
Yeah.
Let me make the other point. You see, at the provider level, these are the kinds of things that people are thinking about. But at the same time, what the regulatory bodies, and I'm thinking about the SAQAs and QCTOs and those kind of places, they need to look very, very carefully at the moment. What are the kind of policies that they've got in place that are restrictive? So, for example, if one looks at the QCTO, there's this idea of workplace-based learning. Now, I mean, you are sitting at home, Gabriel, and I'm sitting at home. Is this a workplace? Will it? Is that considered to be part of your workplace training that you are doing, and so on? And if one looks at those policies, it is written, very narrowly that the workplace is something that you go to. It's not, this idea now that we are talking about working from home. So in the short term, what these bodies can also do is to look at some of those restrictive things that has been put in their policies and so on, because we need to think about work in a kind of different way also. And that is also what the pandemic is challenging us to do.
It's interesting thing that you've touched on is I had a privilege of having a conversation with Sebastian Thron, who's the Google guy. And we spoke about this 6 years ago, where he was like, he teaches very high level artificial intelligence, and he opened his class up, his Stanford class up, for anyone to do it. And his top student ended up being 100 in that list. And then it's just interesting to see, I mean, he kind of did it as an experiment, he almost got fired for it, but he saw this coming, now it's happening. And the interesting thing that he said, exactly what you said, he said about the cost is too high for the duration. And he also said that high level postgrad type artificial intelligence content changes so quickly that if you do a 3-year postgrad course on that, by the time you're done with it, everything you've taught is already outdated. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that changes now. I mean, we're talking about policy, but even from the institution side, there's going to have to be a different approach on the content even.
Yeah, look, I think, just also, this is also the other thing I think that, this is challenging regulatory bodies in major ways, is that, the regulatory bodies have been struggling to deal with this idea of online, learning and so on. So although there's a kind of broad policy out and so on, and I know that the QCTO has, issued a kind of directive where they're a bit more flexible. But I do think the kind of work that they ought to do is to say, how do we make sure that, that there's quality online teaching and learning that takes place? Because we also know that, that there are very, very badly structured things from a quality perspective online. And so, one would have to learn quite quickly, how to do it and how to put, very good mechanisms in place to be able to make sure, that there are quality offerings, and that those institutions that are accredited to offer these things, that they are able to really, give people value for money. Because I think that is a major thing.
Yeah, I love that. Given the current context, what are some of the key opportunities and challenges for recognition of learning?
As I said, one of the challenges, certainly in our context, even before COVID, was this whole idea of the integration of education and training. As I said, there were a couple of things that was tried. In fact, as we're sitting here this morning, there's a huge amount qualifications that has been developed, that is registered on the National Qualifications Framework, that is not recognized by people in industry and people in academic institutions. So, so I really think that that is an area that that is it's a major challenge, and we would have to put our heads together as to how to solve that problem. My own view has been that problem has largely been a problem where people attach particular value to certain types of learning. So, for example, if you go to a university, that learning is seen not as different, but as better than, the learning that happens in the workplace. So, so I do think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to try to deal with firstly with the stigma on the one hand of workplace learning and of training on the one hand, but also on the other hand, it is also to see how does one recognize the learning that happens in these places, and also that we reward that in a way that that kind of makes sense. So I also think that at the societal level, we would have to change the way in which we look at these things, because Gabriel, people often say to you, "Are you working with your hands?" And if you are working with your hands, then it seems like it is, it is not as good as if you are working and thinking and so on.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very false way, of looking at the world. So that for me is one of the major challenges, not only in South Africa, but it's a challenge across the world. The second challenge I think that we're confronted with is that there are sometimes unnecessary barriers that gets placed in into the path of people and so on. And so in some cases, I think the questions about access is quite an important thing that we have to rethink and relook. Let me give you an example. When I was working at University of the Western Cape, what has happened there was, they were saying that, look, the whole population, in fact, is a population that is disadvantaged. So what we need to do is to think about, if you allow people in, you need to make sure that, of course, that they're able to deal with the work and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, what you need to look at is, what is the outcome? What is it, the stuff that you would like people to know, do, and understand at the end of learning?
Yeah.
And then you need to support them, right throughout that process, so that at the end of the day, that they are competent in terms of what it is that you are wanting as a standard at the end of the day. And I think that kind of thinking for me, needs to take shape, across, not only in South Africa again, but across the world, as it were. I think the third thing for me, again, in terms of unnecessary barriers, and I said it, that I think that some of the policy stuff needs to change. I mean, this idea of having a 50% rule in universities and so on, I think that is something that needs to change, and people need to do it fairly quickly, because if we don't do it quickly, then in actual fact, the world is going to just pass this country by in a major way. Now I want to then say that, although I was talking about those as challenges, if we do it quickly, if we move, if we think, if we apply our mind to it, it then becomes opportunities, for how we can open things up, make things more accessible, and so on. And then the other point I want to make from a South African perspective is that, look, if one looks at the African continent, I mean, this is a huge continent, and the kinds of innovations that we can create and deliver here, we can make that available, in fact, and open up, not only the continent, but also the rest of the world. And so this pandemic and the technological tools that we have really opens up the thing for a global audience. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I don't know whether you watched Mark Lottering the other day. You were so excited, that 15,000 people,
Yeah.
Could buy tickets, and
That's
he could
incredible.
speak to people in Dubai and other kind of places and so on. But I mean, if one just thinks about it, the kinds of technological tools that we've got opens us up, for the whole world to be able to participate, if we have a very good product, and you've got a very good stable base in terms of what you've got. And also, as I said, technology is deflationary. And so it opens up the abundance. It opens up the idea that more and more people can participate in this thing if we are doing it. Last point I want to make is the key thing that I think that we are faced with, and this is the thing about the digital divide. I don't think that we must just set up things and charge the living daylights out of people. Actually, we must make sure that people in rural areas and elsewhere, that they also have access to, to the technology, because that is going to be the new dividing line. Those who have that are digital, that have got digital stuff, and those who don't have. And I think that is something again that we are grappling with now during this period.
Sure, very good. We are unfortunately running out of time. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to squeeze one more question in that came from Facebook. Where does the NSA and NEDLAC fit in? I'm just reading the question as I've received it.
Where does the NSA and NEDLAC fit in?
We've got 5 minutes, so it's going to have to be, unfortunately, a very quick explanation.
No, let me try quickly. The NSA is the National Skills Authority. And NEDLAC is, where the government, business, and labor, where they're negotiating policy and so on. Look, I think, all of these places are quite important. The NSA is quite important in the sense that, that they can make things work from their perspective. It's also a body where all the social partners are in. And I think it's quite important that, they need to take heed of what the president was saying, that this is an opportunity for us to create a world that is less, where we don't have all of this inequality, and all of these bodies can make a huge difference if they agree that we need to eradicate inequality in the country, and then put policies in place that will allow that to happen. So all of these structures have got a key role to play in terms of us moving to a more equal society, and digitally equal society as well.
I think that's exactly what this pandemic has opened up. I mean, we've got everyone's being shaked and rattled concerning how we do things and how we look at it, but the opportunity within this space is just beautiful to say. I mean, bring the cost of education down, because we've got all the technology to do that. Thank you very much for your time, Joe. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up. That was really insightful, and I'm sure everyone has learned something today. And enjoy the rest of your day. Please have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Morning still. Cheers. Bye.